Grace and peace be with you on this day. I happen to like a phrase that is used rather often in conversations, and the phrase is, "and all that stuff." It's a conversational tool. When we are in the midst of a conversation that just has too much detail, when you just want to cut to the chase, just get to the bottom line, we might use the thing to cut through a major swab and say, "and all that stuff." And so we've all been in that conversation when somebody says, the omelet didn't sit well with me, those eggs and the cheese, I think something must have been off because I spent all day dealing with that stuff. And we know exactly what the person means. We don't need to go there. We don't need to have any more information. But every once in a while, we come across an individual whose narration technique gives us a luxury of details, sometimes more than we may want. And when I come across those people, I sometimes just want to put my ears where they go, no, stop already, that's a TMI, too much information. Well, the use of all that stuff is welcome in moments like that. It also happens in church, believe it or not. In church, we have usually parishioners seated in the pews that wish that pastors would just use those words and all that stuff. And then just cut to the end and then give a blessing and leave, right? It's very obvious around Easter time. People go from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday, and they cut out all the stuff in between. And it's rather easy to do. All you got to do is just skip 2 days, right? Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday. And, before you know it, you went from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday, and you skipped out all that crucifixion stuff. And, we hear it. We hear it all the time from people and say, well, he came to town. They put palms on the floor, and they greeted him, and then he got arrested, and then all that crucifixion stuff happened, and then he rose on the third day, and here I am today singing hallelujah. So is the case today between Thanksgiving and Christmas. We want to jump from Thanksgiving to Christmas and cut out all the stuff in between. The thing is that this time it's 4 weeks long. And before you had the luxury of just skipping 2 days, and now it's a total of 4 weeks. So if you don't come on the first Sunday of Advent because you're grieving from the football games, we're going to catch you on the second, or if not on the third, or if not on the fourth. And at one point or another, we are going to let you know that the season of Advent and what it's about, and how come we're still not in Christmas. So what is Advent? Advent is a season of waiting and preparing. We are waiting for God to enter into our lives. It is a season thick with metaphors. We have these metaphors of light, of Jesus being the light that enters into the world, and so forth. And so Advent is really a time of darkness. If we are in Advent, we are in darkness. The light enters on Christmas Eve or on Christmas Day. When we are in Advent, we are invited to explore the darkness, to explore the possibility of God entering into our lives. Advent also marks the start of the Christian calendar. Biblically speaking, it is appropriate that we should start in darkness in Advent because that's exactly how the Bible begins. The first few words in the Bible from the book of Genesis said, "In the beginning there was darkness." At least one of the translations says that. There are other translations that use other words. But in the beginning, there was darkness. And then God spoke and he said, "Let there be light." It is also appropriate to begin with darkness because that's exactly how human life begins. We are in darkness inside the womb. And it's not until we emerge that we see the light. Astrophysicist, something I'll never be. Astrophysicists have made a discovery, and that is that the space between the stars, that space that is dark, is not an empty void. And you may have read this already or heard it on NPR, but that space between the stars actually has energy. It's imperceptible to the human eye, but it has energy that can be measured. And they've given it a name. The name is dark matter. And so the space between the stars is just no longer empty space. It is actually a something. It is dark matter. And they now speak about dark matter being 80% of the universe. It comprises 80% of our universe. Dark matter is a theory that has pretty much been accepted by astrophysicists around the world, but it leads to another theory. And the theory is that dark matter is the fabric that holds the universe together. The mystic in me, and if you allow me to be a mystic, right? We'd all want our pastors to be mystical. The mystic in me wants to take this information a deep further. I want you to consider that the space between us is not empty space. That although it might be imperceptible to the human eye, it is actually filled with the Spirit of God. And that the Spirit of God is the fabric that holds our lives together. And so consequently, these things lead to several truisms that we have known throughout time. And that is that all things are connected. And that nothing has ever lived in isolation. And that our joy affects everyone else. And so does our darkness. Our darkness it also affects the rest of the community. And we've known people like that. This is common wisdom. There are people that when they enter into the room, their smile just lights up the entire room, and it becomes contagious, and then people get happy. The same for the opposite. Consequently, although it might be imperceptible, we are all connected. We are connected in ways that make us all accountable for each other. So therefore, the dark times that are suffered in Paris and Brussels, Mali and Beirut and everywhere are also felt here in peaceful Pass-A-Grille. And they become part of our fabric here, as far away as we might feel from those communities in Europe. The dark times suffered by individuals that might be seated very near us are also part of our reality. It's part of the fabric of our lives as well, because as a community of faith, when we join together in prayer, it's more than just an exercise of words. It's an exercise in connecting with each other. So it is from this mystical understanding of connection. It is from this mystical place that I approach Advent. And therefore the candle of hope that was lit by the Webb family today is more than light for this room. It is light that is supposed to extend to all people, everywhere. Advent gives meaning to our faith that there is hope. There is hope in dark times. Today's readings were written during dark times. And as different as 21st century St. Petersburg might be from 1st century Jerusalem, there's actually a lot more in common than we might know. As different as we might feel from people who lived in another era and around the other side of the world, we actually have a lot in common. Because you see, the human heart hasn't really changed. The human condition remains the same. And throughout the eras, the different generations have all struggled with one variation or another of the same thing. Be it love and hatred, faith and fear, hope and despair, war and peace, and then war again. It was true then, and it is true now. The human heart has remained the same, which means that the work of the church is never really quite done. The work of the church is to remain alive generation after generation for all people, which is why Advent is as relevant today as it was back in the 1st century. So therefore, darkness has never really been the question. The question is, how do we emerge from it? Now, most of us, if we're to be honest, are afraid of the dark. So much so that we have made a collective effort as a society to create an entire agency to provide electricity and light on a 24-hour basis. We have access to light 24/7, 52 weeks out of the year, every single day. Now that technological and engineering accomplishment is actually impressive, but we've had it for so long that we take it for granted. We really don't know what it is like to all of a sudden be without electricity. And we forget that actually not too long ago, electricity was not that dependable. That electricity kind of came and went with the generators and with the wiring. When I was a child living in Puerto Rico, 24 hours of electricity was considered a luxury. We had blackouts on a daily basis. And I have childhood memories of sitting in the living room of our house watching TV in one of 5 channels. Do you remember that one where there was only 5 channels? So you had 3. Well, yeah, I'm a little younger. Well, the thing is that, my kids can't believe that there was a time when there was only 3 or 5 channels. But anyway, here we were watching TV, and all of a sudden, boom, there goes electricity. And everything would be gone. And the room and the house would be pitch black. And I don't really quite remember us getting completely inconvenienced. We just kind of got up and went back to our rooms. It was during moments like that my brother made up a game. And it was a game, of course, that he could always change the rules on. And the game was, can we live in the darkness? And so he would challenge me that in the darkness of the house, in the midst of a blackout, that I should go back to my room or go back to some place and retrieve an item that we already know where it is, whether it's my homework or, whatever the shoe is and so forth. And then, of course, I didn't know it, but he would go around and change the furniture so that I would bump into it and fail. But in that game, there was a lot that was learned about walking in the darkness. It's funny, I had a little flashback of that not too long ago when my kids were watching a TV show. Then the theme of the TV show itself is the end of civilization. There's no more electricity. And then my kids watch it horrified. Oh my God, can you imagine there's just going to be no electricity? And there are several movies like that as well. Anyway, the thing is that we have more than just around-the-clock electricity today. We have become an around-the-clock society. We have around-the-clock news. We have around-the-clock entertainment. We have around-the-clock shopping. And this around-the-clock setup that we have actually has provided for us so much, and we've become so dependent on it that there are people out there that do say we've gotten just a little bit soft. Are we becoming a society with just too much comfort, and we have forgotten what it is to go without? There's a question that's actually postulated with quite frequency, and what is this doing to our children? Children that are born into this society that has around-the-clock everything. Will they become people that are unable to cope with darkness? Now I'm not talking about physical light. Now I'm talking in the metaphorical. Have we become people that are unable to cope with the darkness in our lives, be it loss of employment, be it the death of a loved one, be it whatever situation and condition that might enter into our lives and throw us down a dark path? St. John of the Cross, a 16th century poet and mystic, wrote a very, very beautiful and long poem called The Dark Night of the Soul. And the dark night of the soul puts out there the consideration that every individual, regardless of era, regardless of geography, goes through a dark night of the soul as a requirement in order to walk a little bit closer to God, in order to deepen our faith and our understanding. If we were to go ahead and consider the difficulties and the challenges and the very grief and pain that we sometimes feel as an actual requirement of us and our life, maybe we wouldn't be trying so hard to sterilize everything around us all the time. And people go through the dark night of the soul for a variety of different reasons. There's a variety of different things that could trigger it. It could be a health crisis. It could be the loss of a loved one or of employment. It could even be a nationwide problem or a global crisis of some sort. People who are in the midst of the dark night of the soul are navigating through uncharted territory, and often they feel lost. Often they feel that God has abandoned them, that even their loved ones have abandoned them, and they are left all alone to carry their own cross all by themselves. But there's something that happens to people who endure the dark night of the soul, people who reach the other side, and they work their way through it, and they eventually get to the light. Those individuals now have an extra layer of something that makes them just a little bit different. Dare I say, slightly mystical. And we know people like that. They're all around us. They're in this community of faith. People who have had trials and tribulations, and they endured through it, and they came out and can now be labeled one of the wise people among us. For the people who are mystical, and they breathe in the many faces of God, darkness is not to be feared. It is to be welcomed like an old friend. The dark night of the soul has inspired many stories, many novels, many movies. And I'm going to offer you one of those stories at this moment. And like most stories, it begins with once upon a time. In a land very much our own, there was a young man who was a musician. He was a soloist, a singer, and a piano player. Along with other musical instruments, he excelled in music. And he was fortunate enough to be able to make a living off of it. And he got a job to be a musician, but that required for him to travel and to go far away. And this young man was married to a very beautiful young woman. And she was in her 9th month of pregnancy. And he got up early that morning to get ready for his travels and to depart. And he saw his sleeping wife, and he decided to leave her alone and to sleep, to not wake her up. And as he beheld her beauty, he had this sense of deep love all of a sudden run through him, and he could have sworn that never before in their married life had she seemed so beautiful to him. She just glowed the way that pregnant women glow. And then, in the same breath, he had this premonition that he should not leave her side, that he should put aside his work and he should stay there with her. But he had a commitment. He had a commitment to go and perform at this event, and he was going to honor his commitment. So he walked away from his bride, and he looked at her one last time, and he went off to work. The next day, at the end of that day in the evening, he received a telegram that his young bride had passed away. So he rushed home. And as he's reaching his home, a neighbor approaches him and tells him that before she died, she gave birth to a baby boy. But that baby boy also died, and that he died just a few moments ago before he arrived. And so he ran, and he found his beautiful bride and his beautiful baby boy, both of them lifeless. And he grabbed them and he held them in his arms. And he wept, and he wept. And it threw him down a very, very long, dark path, his own dark night of the soul. And he thought he would never recover. And his grief just became worse as time passed. It got to the point where he blamed God. He blamed God for what happened. And then he blamed himself. And he thought that maybe had he not been a musician, that maybe had he not gone away for work, she would still be alive today. And he started to think all those things that people in grief think about, because grief is irrational. It's completely irrational. And time passed. And he isolated himself. And he became a recluse. And then one of his musician friends called him out. And he said, "Why don't you come to my house. Spend some time with me." And he went reluctantly. He doesn't even know why he went, because he really didn't want to go. And when he entered the house, there was the piano of his friends sitting right there in the middle of the living room. And when he was interviewed later, he said that he didn't know exactly why he went to the piano, but he went and sat at that piano, and the Spirit of God just swept right through him. And he could do no other but sing and play. And as he sang and as he played the piano, the Spirit of God gave him these words that have become a song that I know you know. A song that you have sung yourself. A song that has become part of our church life. And I'm going to ask Bob now to go ahead and sing a verse of this song.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, help me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me
Did you hear those words? Take my hand, lead me to the light. This is a song of Advent. When we are in Advent, we are in darkness. And we turn to God for God to be our light. Friends, I have for you the words given by Tommy Dorsey. Tommy Dorsey, the father of gospel, who's the protagonist of the story I've just gave you. And Tommy Dorsey, not to be confused for Tommy Dorsey, the jazz player, then went on forward to write many, many gospel songs, full of hope and full of light for a people that in many ways were oppressed. Tommy said, when we are in our deepest grief, when we feel furthest from God, this is when he is closest, and when we are most open to God's restoring power. My friends, this is the season of Advent. This is a season for us to know that we're all connected. And although it might be imperceptible to our human eye, the Spirit of God is there holding the fabric of our lives together. This is the season of Advent, a time when we acknowledge the darkness in our lives, a time when we know that the Spirit of God is going to burst through like a ray of hope through the thickness. There is no darkness thick enough to withstand the love and the hope of God. May we greet in this season of Advent, may we greet the darkness like an old friend and know that the Spirit of God will be there to hold our lives together. Amen and hallelujah.
At this time, we